Shabbat Shalom, everybody. It's Rabbi Stephen Rashbi in the house with this week's 10-minute Torah. Hope you're having a great week and having a great week. And by the way, happy Rosh Chodesh. It is a new month on Monday, Yom Sheni. It is the month of Shabbat. Now, does that sound familiar to anybody? What happens in the month of Shabbat? We have the holiday Tu B'Shvat. Now, tu, what does tu mean? Interesting word. It's not really a word. What it is, excuse me, in Hebrew, the numbers are the letters. So the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet is Aleph. And Aleph means one. The next letter, Bet, is 2, Gimel, 3, Dalet, 4, and so on. When we get to the number 10, we use Yud. It's the 10th letter in the alphabet, and that is 10. Now we start combining letters. Yud Aleph for 11, Yud Bet for 12, etc. Now, there's a problem when it comes to 15, because it ought to be Yud Hey. Yud for 10, Hey for 5. However, what is Yud Hey? It's Yah. It's the name of God. And we don't take the name of God in vain, so we use two different numbers. We use a Tet, which is a T sound, which is 9, and we use a Vav, which is for 6. 9 and 6 is 15. That way we represent the number 15, and we're not taking God's name in vain. Now, what else is a Vav? Vav, we know, can be a Va, but if you put a dot on top, it's O. If you put a dot in the middle, or Dagish in the middle, it's U. So Tet Vav spells two. So Tu B'Shvat is the 15th day of the month of Shabbat. And what is Tu B'Shvat? It is the new year for trees. So what does that mean, new year for trees? It means that when you first plant a tree, a fruit tree, you have to let it sit for 3 years before you can take the fruit, and then in the 4th year the fruit goes to the Kohanim, the priests and the ministers, as an offering, and then after that it's all yours, except for the tithes and everything, the 10% tithe, etc. Okay, so that is one of the New Years. That's how they mark the new trees. It's the Tu B'Shvat is here, the joyous holiday, hail the trees, new year, happy holiday. Okay, so that's actually one of 4 New Years. Now, what are we getting to? This week's portion, Bo, Hashem is going to deliver the last 3 plagues. And the last plague, the 10th plague, is a whammy, as we used to say. It is the killing of the firstborn. And that's the thing that finally broke the back of Pharaoh, and he said, fine, get out of here. And that's what it took, unfortunately. There wasn't a single household where there wasn't someone who was dead, firstborn. Whether it was a person, the firstborn, whether it was an animal, for example, from the nobility, down to the dregs of society, to the animals, firstborn. Except for the Israelites, they were told to do what? Prepare to leave Egypt in haste, cook the meat, make the sacrifice of the sheep, and have that Pesach offering. Okay, that's why we do the shank bone during the Seder. That's the offering that, while we're sitting there, we take the blood, we put it on the lintels, so that Hashem, when he sends his destroyer out to take the lives of the other people, he sees the blood and he passes over. That's what the word Pesach means. It means literally to pass over. And that's our Pesach offering. That's what they ate. And of course, the meat had to be consumed completely. If there was not enough people in the household to consume all the meat, you invite a couple of houses together and you all eat the sacrifice, and then the next day you're on your way. Now, Hashem tells Moses 2 things. First of all, the new moon will be Rosh Chodesh will be the first month of the year in which we start counting the months. Now, they were going to leave on the 1st of Nisan. Nisan happens in the spring. And in fact, there's a couple of portions in chapter 13 of Exodus. 2 of those portions are 2 of the parchments in the Tefillin. And actually, sometimes when I have time, I will recite those portions. And of course, the other portions are the Shema. So those are your 4 portions in the Tefillin. So now we're going to count the months. So Nisan is actually the first month. Now you're saying, well, wait a minute. I thought the new year was, in the fall when we had the month of Tishrei. Isn't that when we changed the year? And the answer is yes, we do. That's the 7th month. Tishrei is the 7th month. Remember, it's counted from the month of Nisan. Nisan being the 1st month. Tishrei is the 7th month. 7 being a holy number. I believe we talked about the 7 days of Shabbat. 7 months is the new year. 7 weeks of Shavuot, etc. And that's when we change the month. However, the months will be counted from Nisan because this is the month of our freedom. This is when the moon started to become so important. When the Seleucid Greeks, when the Assyrian Greeks, the Seleucids destroyed the temple, and they were taking over Judea before the revolt of the Maccabees of the Hasmonean dynasty, one of the things they said is you can't observe the new moon. I mean, that kills it for our festivals because our festivals are all based on the new moon, the new month. When does Passover come? We know it's in the 15th day of the month of Nisan. How do we know it's the 15th day? Very simple. We see a full moon. There it is. How do we know it's Tu B'Shvat? Full moon, right? And in fact, back in the old days, okay, before we had computers and before we had mathematics and everything, how did we know it was a new month? Two witnesses independently would have to see the horns of the new moon. They go back to the Sanhedrin, which is the Jewish High Court of 72 elders, whatever it was, and they would report that we saw the moon, so the Sanhedrin would declare the new month. Now, some months have 30 days, some months have 29 days, some months, Cheshvan and, oh my gosh, the one after it, Kislev, one with Hanukkah, has 29 or 30 depending on the year. Sometimes we put the extra month in, the second Adar, which means that Purim is on the 15th. There's the 15th, full moon again, on the 15th of Adar, of the second Adar. And then a month later is when we have Passover. That's how we figure it. So all this is important. So that's our second New Year. First, we have one that's for the trees and one which is when we start counting the months. So let's not get too embroiled in this, but you get the idea. So let's talk a little bit about the portion. So there's some things that are happening here, okay? First of all, one of the things is that the Hebrews, the Israelites, were going to go off, and they were going to go about 3 days' journey to do a sacrifice to Hashem, and they were going to sacrifice the sheep or the goats. Now, they obviously couldn't do that in Egypt because the Egyptians would have a fit. That's their gods, right? However, the Israelites were sacrificing the meat, the animals for the meat to make the Passover sacrifice, and they were doing it right in Egypt. The Egyptians were powerless to do this. That is why the Shabbat before Pesach is called Shabbat HaGadol. It's the big Sabbath. Not only is it the big Shabbat when we went our freedom, it's right before Passover, but it's also when we got to eat the meat, when we got to do that sacrifice. And we also know that we have now commandments. Right now we're getting set up because this is something L'Dorotechem that we're going to be observing for all generations. So we have the Pesach sacrifice. We don't do this now because we don't have the temple, or at least not now, not yet. But we do have the Passover Seder, and the shank bone represents that. Additionally, we also are told to eat the matzah. You have that bread, you're ready to go, and you just put the bread, you just make the flour, you just bake it real quick before it leavens, and you leave. Now, the leavening also has a spiritual meaning. It's not just the fact that, we had to get all our goods and we had to get ready to go the next day, but the idea of leavening has the connotation of arrogance and pomposity. And that's why in the temple they served flatbread even when it wasn't Passover. Because the idea, they wanted to be humble. Think about it. What is matzah? It's this little bread, it's this little cracker, hasn't had a chance to risen, So it's very humble food. And we look at that and we look at our own egos and we see that, our egos don't leaven, they don't rise. We obey the commandments. We're humble, like the flatbread, okay? So, finally, Pharaoh is defeated. Moses had gone to Pharaoh before the last plague, and Pharaoh says, do not come here again, and Moses didn't. Now, after the plague, Pharaoh was the firstborn, yet he was spared. He was the only firstborn spared, because he saw what happened, and now Pharaoh has to come to Moses and Aaron and said, basically, okay, you've made your point, get out of here, take the people out of here. Now, even though the Pesach this is the first Seder, let's face it, happened at night. The Israelites were ready. They weren't going to leave during the evening. They weren't going to sneak out of Egypt under cover of darkness. They were going to leave during the day with their heads held up, going out to freedom. With pride, with the idea that we're Israelites, we're going to our freedom. And that's really a big part of what this portion is about. Now, again, someone says, well, why do we read these portions now, and why don't we read it for Passover? Well, we kind of do. Not only that, but consider the fact that when we put on tefillin every day, except Shabbat and festivals, we have those passages in the tefillin. So we're remembering this not just once a year for Passover, we're remembering this every day. And that's really the key, that Hashem rescued us from bondage. It's, again, the 4 cups. I will take you out of Egypt, I will rescue you from slavery, I will redeem you as a people, and I will take you in as your God. 4 cups of wine for Passover. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for listening. Remember, we have our meeting on Sunday, January 13th, 10 o'clock, and before that, we'll see you in services.